All right, why don't we get started on Chapter 4 of 19 of The Mafia Princess. Chapter 4, Careful Sam. From the time he first held me in his arms to the moment he walked out the door of our home to go to college, I idolized my father. I cherished any moment I had with him and I tried hard to please him. More often than not, I failed. I was born Annette Giancana at 3:50 a.m. on June 23, 1935, at Mother Cabrini Memorial Hospital. At that time, Sam and my mother lived at 2822 West Lexington Street, Chicago, Illinois, a predominantly poor but clean ethnic Italian neighborhood. Annette was a name I hated as I grew older, so I later changed it to Antoinette because it sounded better and had a more sophisticated ring. Mother was not a physically strong woman, and from the beginning, our family physician and friend, Dr. Eugene Kresrow, was concerned when he discovered she was pregnant. His fears were justified. Not only did Mother have a difficult pregnancy, but I arrived 2 months early and weighed in at only 3 pounds, a weight that in those years was considered dangerous. The best account of the time of my birth came from one of Sam's closest friends, Chucky English. Chucky English was born Charles Ingles in November 1914. He was a handsome, rugged man with dark brown eyes and a lean, muscular body. He stood about 5 feet 10 inches, rather tall among the Mafia men who dealt with Sam. Chucky was a cherished friend of Sam's. FBI records reflect the fact that he had arrests for extortion and counterfeiting phonograph trademarks, and that in the 1958 Senate labor rackets hearings he was repeatedly invoked the Fifth Amendment when questioned about extortion, labor racketeering, beatings, and assaults. He was also identified as a Chicago mob soldier in the Valachi trial and in the 1983 hearings of the U.S. Senate Subcommittee on Investigations. Numerous newspaper accounts have identified Chucky English as a West Side loan shark and labor racketeer, the man who led the mob invasion of the jukebox business. I knew Chucky from his many visits to the house and from his operation of a business owned by my father, Lormar Distributing Company, which controlled the distribution of jukeboxes and records throughout Illinois. Chucky was also very active politically and boss of Chicago's 29th Ward. He also oversaw the Chicago Mafia's control of a huge Arizona real estate enterprise that was heavily involved in everything from land ownership to the infiltration of the Southwest state's jukebox and restaurant industry. Until I was out of my teens, I thought of Chucky and his wife Laura as family. They weren't just friends to Sam or to my mother, they were like uncles and aunts. It was Chucky and Laura who told me of Sam's reaction to my birth. The English's bedroom was adjacent to my mother and father's in our 3-flat home on West Lexington Street. Chucky was working for my father with the remnants of the 42s and the Capone gang. The Englishes had helped my mother during her pregnancy and consoled Sam when he worried over her fragility. Chucky told me that Sam's greatest fear was that something would happen to my mother and that I might not be born alive. Dr. Cheshrow had warned him of such a possibility without telling my mother. Once my father was sure mother was safe and that I was alive with a good prognosis for survival, he returned to our home in the wee hours of the morning and climbed into the English's bedroom through the window. It was still dark, the air was stifling, and the windows didn't have screens on them. Once inside, they recollected that he sat on the edge of their bed, shouting at them, waking them from a sound sleep, announcing that he had a little girl. Sam spent hours talking to them about me, his firstborn, and later to Grandpa Antonio Giancana. He talked only briefly to my mother's family, the Detolves, who had never really liked Sam and opposed his marriage to my mother. It wasn't long after I came home with Mama from the hospital that I took ill, came down with pneumonia. The doctor said I had to have mother's milk to survive, and Mama was unable to supply it. Sam turned the world upside down to get you the milk you had to have, Chucky told me. He used friends, he pulled strings, he used the political connections of family and friends, and finally he acquired enough clout to move the Chicago Board of Health to act to provide the necessary milk at the city's expense. I was a little more than 4 years old when Sam decided the family needed a vacation in Rhinelander, Wisconsin. Though my memories of that time are somewhat fuzzy, pictures from family albums and recollections of close relatives project an image of Sam as a handsome, slim, streetwise hustler with a full head of hair, carefully tailored clothes, and a flashy car. Wherever Sam went, he went first class. Our car was an expensive convertible roadster, popular in that era of Chicago's gangsterism and Sam's proudest possession. He kept the car so polished that its chrome running boards sparkled and you could see your reflection in the door. There was, in fact, nothing subdued about Sam's appearance and demeanor. He was clearly a young man moving upstairs fast, and he wasn't afraid to let the world know it. When we went to Rhinelander, no expense was spared. We stayed at a luxurious hotel where we had a suite of rooms, including separate bedrooms for Mama and Dad and for Bonnie and me, together with separate baths and a sitting living room complete with a fully stocked bar. It turned out to be a wonderful time, with Sam and Mama taking me shopping, swimming together at an almost private beach, and picnicking, something I had never done before. It was a happy time, and I tried my damnedest to please. Life seemed so free and easy that I was totally unaware of any danger that might be present. Of course, at that age, I knew nothing of Sam's operating a still, or being involved in robberies, or of any criminal activity of any kind. Danger was the furthest thing from my mind when late on Saturday morning I heard a knock at the door of our suite. Mama and Dad were still in their bedroom, and Bonnie was playing in the playpen in our bedroom. There was a second knock, followed by a man's voice on the other side of the door announcing rather cheerfully, "Breakfast is served." Without further thought, I went straight to the door, opened it, and let the man wheel the table of food into the main sitting room. As the waiter set the table, Sam came into the room from his bedroom. For an instant, he turned white as a sheet. He ducked back into his room and returned with my mother to pay the waiter. Almost before the door had closed on the waiter, Sam was raging. "Never, never open the door to a stranger again," he shouted. He upended me and gave me a thorough spanking to bring the lesson home. Then he stalked off without eating, mumbling something about how I was going to get us all killed one day. I, of course, didn't realize until years later that pretending to be room service was a technique often used by professional killers to get at their victims in hotels or motels. I also didn't understand that men like my father who work in an organized criminal atmosphere live constantly with the fear that someday, somewhere, someone is going to try to kill them. So many in the old Al Capone mob had been killed receiving flowers, eating in restaurants, answering doors without checking first who was in the hallway or on the front stoop. Sam had learned from the example set by Anthony Accardo. Accardo was suspected by the FBI and the Chicago police of having a role in the St. Valentine's Day Massacre in 1929, when 7 members of the rival Dion O'Banion gang were machine-gunned in a Chicago warehouse by members of the Capone gang. One of the suspected killers was Jack Machine Gun McGurn, who was known as Vincenzo de Mora when Sam was a member of the 42s. De Mora was one of those who had brought Sam into the Capone gang because of his talents as a wheelman and his reputation for keeping cool under pressure. 7 years after that massacre on St. Valentine's Day, De Mora was killed in a public bowling alley by men armed with machine guns, who after they went through left a comic Valentine on his body. It was this kind of pressure, the subconscious knowledge that your best friend, perhaps even a relative, might be the one sent to kill you, that prompted super caution on my father's part. His rule of thumb, his formula for survival in the early years was, trust no one, take no chances. Time and again as my life progressed, I had glimpses of that caution, that fear when I was with him. Our homes on West Lexington and later in Oak Park were places where Sam's associates of years past and present frequently congregated. Men like Fat Leonard and his brother Marshall Caifano, Sam DiStefano, Sam Tietz Battaglia, Albert Obi Fraboda, Joey Glimko, or Paul the Waiter Ricca, all former members of the 42s, the Capone gang, or the expanded Chicago mob, were visitors and close friends of my father's. Friends or not, Sam never greeted them at the door himself, and he never permitted me to answer the door when they were knocking. That left a lasting impression on me as a child. There were so many precautions Sam took at home and away from home. Mama, no matter how weak or ill she might be, always had to descend the store. Mama, no matter how weak or ill she might be, always had to descend the stairs of our 2 flats or 3 flats and check on the caller through a speakerphone before opening the door. I recall her peeking out through the window curtains to see if she recognized who it was. Even when she knew the visitor, she would still crack the door slightly to get a better view before letting the person in. If it was someone she didn't recognize, she would get the name through the speakerphone, asking Sam if he knew the individual and if he wanted to speak or meet with them. If Sam said no, Mama would simply tell the caller Sam wasn't at home. Then she would laboriously climb those stairs back to our flat. By the time she reached the top floor, she would be out of breath and her heart pounding a mile a minute. It made me so angry with my father when I saw her like that while he sat nonchalantly by the window, apparently unconcerned about her physical state. Looking out, scanning the neighborhood, trying to spot someone or something strange to the area. Sam and Mama were equally careful about telephone calls. They were always screened by Mama. Sam would never answer the phone, only my mother. She would ask who it was, repeat the name loudly enough for him to hear, and watch as he nodded his head yes or no, indicating he would or wouldn't talk to the caller. Caution seemed to prevail wherever we went. Even as a small child, I noticed before entering a restaurant or any other public place, Sam would always drive around the block at least once or twice to survey the area, see if he saw anything out of the ordinary. Once satisfied things were in order, he would lead us inside, scanning the entire eating area, searching out faces he might recognize. If he saw somebody he knew or wanted to acknowledge him, he would nod or have the waiter discreetly carry a message or a drink to the proper table. And when we sat down, Sam would never allow us to be near a window, and he insisted that his seat be situated so that his back was to the wall and he could have a clear view of the entrance. My father's suspicions, his paranoia about strangers, extended even to the friends that I or my sisters Bonnie, and later Francine, had. It was very difficult for me, for any of us, to have real friends because of Sam's demands for privacy. Everyone I knew was carefully screened. I learned very quickly in life that kids from our neighborhood, whether on Lexington Street or later on South Monitor or in the suburbs of Oak Park, were not to be allowed inside the house unless they had been personally checked out and okayed by Sam. I suppose he didn't want kids around who might blabber about the expensive furniture, chinaware, silver, or crystal. Too much talk about how we lived or what we had might lead tax agents to our door, and that was the last thing Sam wanted. Trouble from tax agents. Al Capone was caught by tax agents, and my father learned from that. Whatever the reason, it was very embarrassing for me and my sisters. It appeared to us that Sam had a complete resume on every youngster and his or her parents that I brought to the house. He knew about their fathers and what they did for a living, about their mothers and how they acted, about their families and the friends they associated with. If he decided for some reason that he disapproved of some child, either because of parents or ethnic background, and Sam had prejudices against everything from blacks and Jews to Greeks and Hispanics, I not only couldn't have the child in my home, I couldn't be seen with him or her. I was always amazed at how much Sam knew about my friends and their families. I learned later that he had his criminal associates gather information like they were private detectives, and this information was frighteningly accurate. He would tell my mother that the father of one child was an alcoholic or a petty thief, or that my friend's mother was sleeping around with other men. He seemed to know how often they breathed or had sex, or when they came home and ate, how much money they had. They didn't know it, but they had no privacy. I was isolated, like some fairy tale princess, from people around me. It was almost as though it weren't family, either my natural family or Sam's crime family. They weren't acceptable. As a result, for many years until I was a senior in high school and later in college, I had no really close friends. I hated that kind of life, but until I was older, I didn't dare question his rule. My failures in maintaining proper security at home and in the selection of friends were the only ways in which I displeased Sam when I was a young child. One of the most serious mistakes took place when I was very young in trying to please him by helping Mama clean house. Sam was a collector of antiques, particularly bisque and porcelain figures. He became such an avid collector that after he died, his collection of Meissen porcelains, Dresden china, Venetian mirrors, rare oil paintings, and antique music boxes were sold at auction at the Chicago Art Galleries in June 1976. This event was the talk of the town and drew art lovers from throughout the Midwest as well as the East. Sam's collecting had begun back on West Lexington Street before he went to jail. It continued up to the year he died. He loved going antiquing, and it was during his travels, first around the Chicago area, and later through the capitals and the off-beaten tracks of the United States, Europe, and Central America, that he developed an almost fanatical bug for rummaging through shops. As he grew older, Long after he was paroled from prison on December 14, 1942, he became an art collector. He would walk into a store, see a painting he admired or a figurine that had classical lines, and he would announce, "I gotta have this painting, it looks great." In the beginning, he might not have understood the paintings he admired. They just looked great. They reached something inside of him, triggered a hidden emotion. Once that trigger was pulled, Sam would move heaven and earth to acquire the painting or figurine or artwork that attracted and moved him so deeply. I think my father, with the right education and study, could have been a connoisseur of art. When I started going to Ladywood School for Girls, an expensive Catholic finishing school for young women in Indianapolis, Indiana, Sam became more conscious of the finer things in art and literature, in chinaware and bisqueware. He became almost obsessed with the need for understanding different forms of culture. It was like a rebirth for him, a new being. Sam went through stages in each development of his art tastes, particularly in paintings. Early on, he liked realistic paintings of people and things and places he could identify. Toward the end of his life, he favored the contemporary, the cubistic, the abstract. There was one phase in particular that I remember vividly every time I walked through my own apartment. On my walls are several paintings of children with tears in their eyes that he acquired in Mexico. These paintings affected him deeply because of the pain and sadness they reflected, the same pain and sadness he saw in the eyes of children whenever he traveled in Mexico. When I was with him once in Cuernavaca, a rather large Mexican town popular with wealthy tourists and where the people were either very rich or lived in poverty, Sam would drive into the city and throw out bags full of pesos to the poor children and adults lining the streets, begging and staring sullenly at the rich gringos. "How the hell can people live that way?" he would ask. "Why didn't they help themselves? Why doesn't their government help them? Those kids are starving and the parents just stand around letting them beg. They should be out hustling, not the kids." He would smile as he watched them scramble for the money and stuff it in their pockets. Despite these moments of compassion, Sam could demonstrate a different side to his character when he was being served a sumptuous meal amid the lavish surroundings of his own wealth. As he savored a particular dish that only the very rich could afford, he would smirk suddenly and say, "I wonder what the poor people are eating tonight." Once the meal was over, Sam would go up to his room and look through his telescope into the valley where the poor people lived. He would sit for hours watching them. While Sam saw the beauty, the grace, the delicacy of the figurines in china that he sought out in antique shops, he also thought of them as investments. They were articles he could give to his children so that they could sell them and never have to pay taxes if they played their cards right. I remember his saying one evening as he looked at his growing collection that one day they would all be very valuable and we would all benefit from them. His fine arts collection also gave him something no one else in Chicago's Mafia had, a touch of class, of culture. It set him apart from the rest of the thugs. One of the figurines Sam treasured the most in those early days on West Lexington Street was that of a girl holding her skirt, a blue skirt. It was a very expensive figurine he had found in an antique shop. It stood on a register which would normally regulate the airflow, but was covered and closed off to accommodate the figurine. It was late in the morning, and Mama was busy doing something in the kitchen when I got the notion to show her that I knew how to dust and that I could be a real helper. I figured if I helped her and did a good job, she would tell Sam and he would be proud of me. So I began cleaning the entire room, just as she had done many times. Everything went super until I reached the register where the figurine stood. As I dusted it, it slipped from its perch and fell to the floor, breaking into a million pieces. Mama came running into the room. She hardly got the words, "Oh my God," out of her mouth before Sam arrived behind her. He looked at the pieces of porcelain on the floor, then at the register, and then at me. Without a word, Sam took off his belt, and as I started to run, he scooped me up from the floor, turned me over his knee, and spanked me with the belt until there were red welts on my bottom. As I sobbed uncontrollably, trying to tell my mother that it was an accident, that I was just trying to help, she turned on me in surprising anger, saying coldly, "Don't touch anything, you hear? Don't touch anything without asking." Sam, once he finished beating me, stormed out of the house without saying another word. His compassion, though displayed liberally to the stricken children of Cuernavaca, was never extended to his own. A broken figurine seemed to mean more to him than a broken child. End of chapter.